Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first lecture of the 2023-2024 Southern Joint Branch Technical Lecture Programme. Tonight's lecture is going to be on ship emergency response. But before I introduce you to our speakers tonight, just do a little bit of housekeeping. This is a hybrid lecture, so we have people on Zoom, we have people in the room. So we're going to handle all the Q&A at the end, because that gives the people online a chance to type their questions into the chat. Speaking of that, type your questions into the Q&A or the chat, but preferably the Q&A. And I will read those out at the end, and we'll also do the questions in the room at the end. Ideally, if you do want to ask questions, if you're that sort of person, speak loudly so that the microphone can pick you up. Preferably come down to the front as well if you can. That would be good. So now our speakers tonight both work for Lloyd's Register's Ship Emergency Response Service. And then to Sophie Taylor and Tim Southern Christian. And I'm sure they will tell you a bit more about themselves. So I'm going to hand over to them now. So
I just want to say before you start, if there is a fire alarm, the exit is straight out the door and then out the doors to the right by the stairs, okay? But we shouldn't have a fire alarm.
Grand, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for making it out here on a very wet and blustery evening tonight. So my name is Tim Southern Christian. This is Sophie Taylor. We both work for Lloyd's Register Ship Emergency Response Service. I've been with them for about a year now. And Sophie, you've been there?
About 3.5 years.
3.5 years. I came from the MOD, having worked in salvage and ship structures along with ship acquisition. So I had a bit of in-service experience. And tonight we are going to talk about how we being Lloyd's Register Service, but there are also other providers out there, how they can provide support to clients worldwide with technical aspects of an incident. I see in the audience there's a couple of you in uniform. I've been told that some of you are cadets. I hope that you never have to call us, but if you do, it would be good if you know a little bit about what we do and the information that we will ask of you. So, this is our agenda for tonight. We're going to look at some statistics and then dive into what's involved in a response. And that is where the cadets amongst you will probably bear with taking some notes. And then we will also look at case study. And if we have time, we might squeeze in a demonstration of the software that we use. So, SIRS, it's an acronym. We use it all the time. I don't really think about why we use it. It's just an acronym. You'll be used to this. Stands for Ship Emergency Response Service. We've been going about 30 years. We have the people, the experience, and the tools to be your first call for technical support in an emergency. So what does that mean? It means you have rapid, global, 24/7 access to expert teams of naval architects, ex-mariners, and specialists. In the event of an incident, be it grounding, be it collision, be it fire, we're able to collaborate closely with the ship and all your shore staff to provide independent, proactive technical support and advice. Why are we qualified to offer this? Well, I think there's a few things. We've used those 3 examples up there, the people, experience, and tools. People, we drill regularly. We're currently averaging about 3 exercises a week, so we are extensively practiced. We have emergencies on average once every 2 weeks. We haven't had one for about 3.5 weeks now, which is nice. Haven't been
said that.
Yeah, well, we'll see if we get called during this. We were the first to offer this kind of service out of all the classification societies. We were approached by some tanker owners, and they requested some shore-based stability support. That is where we started, and today we are a bit beyond tankers. We have other vessels as well. Being associated with LR, we have over 260 years of experience. It's a long time, and it's a lot of history to draw upon. We can draw upon colleagues who are in the structures department, the stability department, their knowledge that they have gained over years when we need it. We're also class agnostic, so even if your vessel isn't classed with LR, we can still provide that support. About a third of our vessels aren't classed with LR, so we can provide that support even if you're not on an LR class vessel. So this is over the last 10 years, just a little graph showing our rough rate of change, you'll notice there was a big dip in COVID. A number of emergencies didn't dip that much, but the number of exercises did dip quite a significant amount. This year so far, we're on track to exceed the most we've done both in exercises and in emergencies ever. This is our fleet. You can see we have a large proportion is tankers. That's where we started. But we also have bulk, gas, containers, passenger ships make up about 5% of our fleet, which I'll come back to that later. And then we do cover everything all the way down to yachts at about 60 meters is generally where we cut off. When they're a bit small, it's quite hard to actually provide support. It's either jump off, get in the lifeboats. We're not able to provide much because we don't have much ballast in capacities. So if we look at our exercises over the last 30 years, you can see that 5% of passengers in our fleet is actually quite a big number now. We spend a lot of time practicing with those. And if you look at it over the last 5 years, can we have the next one? You see that exercise count has gone up to 50% of our exercises. And this is down to regulation. The Safe Return to Port, various other regulations requiring shore-based stability to be tested on a yearly basis means that we do practice. But the cool thing about this is when we look at our emergencies, we remind ourselves of our fleet, actually. Anyone in the audience would like to guess, or we've given the big reveal away, guess what is the largest ship type in terms of emergencies as a percentage? Any guesses? Did anyone see? Shout out. There's 10 options, people. Tanker? Any other ones? It is tanker. And yet our passenger ships make up 50%. Last year, it was 64% of our exercises. They are drilling regularly and they're practicing regularly for an incident that doesn't happen very often. So if you are on board one of these other ship types, bear that in mind. If you look at it over the last 5 years, you'll notice that our bulkers actually go and have incidents a little bit more regularly, even though they make up a much smaller proportion of the fleet. So what I'm trying to say here is practice, be aware, be prepared. So moving on, this is our team. Generally, when you call us, we will have 3 people responding to support you. Number one, who generally sits in the middle chair in our nice little photo shoot that we took earlier in this year. And they are in charge with liaising directly with the client, be it their shore-based team or directly with the ship. So you will be speaking to them. They are well-trained, well-versed. They're senior engineers who have spent a lot of time doing this, a lot of practice. Generally takes about 8 months to a year to train up as a number one. We then also have a number 2. They look after the structures side of things. So if there's any damage to the vessel, they will model a section and then provide that assessment through to our number 3, who looks after the stability side of things. They will model your vessel. They will start with your intact condition and then model the damage that you've occurred through to any proposed remedials that you may have. We have a centre in our office in Southampton, but we also respond remotely from our homes. Generally, this is a good thing. It means that you will have a response within about 15 minutes, rather than us having to drive to the office to then begin the response. So you will get answers quicker, you'll get the technical support that you need quicker, and therefore you will be able to recover your vessel quicker. And that is, the big aim is to be able to give you the information that you need to make the decisions that you have to make. So, the casualty report forms. I forgot about this one. This is a rough incident timeline. Effectively, this information is just saying there is communication backwards and forwards between us and yourselves on the ship or on shore. You will pass information to us, we will assess it, get agreement with yourselves, send it back, and there'll be a discussion. It's a two-way thing. It's not a case of hitting a button and leaving us do it. We want to communicate. We want to be able to ask you questions. We don't want to overwhelm you. We won't be hassling you every 5 minutes. So if you want us to give us more information, or if you have questions that you've thought up, or if you've had progressive flooding, more damage, you can communicate with us. And how you communicate with us, we use this thing called a casualty report form. Here's a quick little example. There are 3 parts. Part A, the before casualty. This is the starting point. This is your intact loading condition that you may have sent to your shore team on departure from your most recent port. This enables us to get a baseline so that we can then model your damage. Right. And that's part B. So you'll report what your damage drafts are, where you might have got holes, what has happened. And then we have part C, which is the part that you probably need our support with most. And this can be as many different remedials as you want to assess. Sophie will talk later about a case study where we went into about 20 different remedial proposals. So Sophie is also now going to take us through what we do with this information and how we can support you.
Hi everyone, so I'm actually going to go through what we end up technically doing in response, and we roughly follow the same order that Tim just showed us with the casualty report form. The first thing we do is we get the initial intact condition before the damage from the ship, and then we model this and we check it, validates what the position the ship was before the damage occurred. We do this so that we know first off what all the filling levels in the tanks were, and it also validates our model and gives us a good baseline to work on. After that, we need to do the damage assessment. So we use a nice little acronym of SS to just remind ourselves what to do and baseline of what to check. It's not fully comprehensive, but it's a good baseline. We model that up on top of our initial intact condition. And then the final thing along the casualty report form is the remedial. So we check what the client has suggested, or we ask them what their goals are and try to help find a solution with them. So the first thing in our SS goal is strength. So in service, we only consider like the global longitudinal strength of the vessel. If there is any damage to the ship, we can modify what the usual permissible shear force and bending moments that the ship's allowed to operate. Maximum, minimum, shear force and bending moment. We adjust that to take into account of the damage. So our number 2 will model a 2D section in a software called RuleCalc. And we pick a frame that is in the way of where the damage is reported. So we then model that, and then in this section here, there's these red sections. That is what we have deemed to no longer contribute to the strength of that section. So the ship that's alongside that is actually the ship that this section was made for. So you can see that as well as the obvious hole in the side, there is a little bit of deformation on the black part of the side, and it actually went up onto the deck. But you can see in our section that we just haven't counted it all as red. So we've said it doesn't contribute towards the strength of it. And that's because we tend to take a bit of a conservative approach, because in that area, it'll at least be reduced from its intact capacity, but we're just getting totally rid of it. So from that, we can then calculate what the percentage loss of that section is, and then derive the new shear force and bending moment permissibles. So the aim is to hopefully reduce the shear force bending moment in the way of the damage, but we can also go a little bit further, and then we could kind of manipulate the bending moment so that buckling areas are perhaps put in tension and cracking areas in compression to prevent further damage. That's pretty much all there is to the strength. So our next S in our SS log is stability. So ship stability will change in the damage case, for instance, such as like groundings or loss of buoyancy, the addition of flood water, or even the loss of ballast water after there's been a breach. So we check against the damage criteria that's relevant for the vessel, so SOLAS or MARPOL, whatever it is. And that assures the survivability of the vessel. But if we can continue getting it to meet the intact stability, we prefer that because it allows a greater operability for things like repair voyages and is usually a little bit more stringent. In our model, we also have things like openings, define the deck edge, the margin line, and wind profile of the vessel, anything that's involved in the criteria. And then the chart on the left here is actually a little snip from our software CSAFE that we use. And so if any criteria condition within that selected criteria set fails, we get a little red warning message pop up, and it highlights in red the criteria that is failing. So that is pretty handy. Next, we go on to our F, which is floatability. So even if our basic parameters look okay, like the strength and the stability that we first assessed, the ship might need some other things to consider. So the basic floatability just comes down to very simple, is just will it sink, will it still be floating, what can maybe impact what it has. So most of this can be seen from the stability results, but other things can impact it, like a reduced freeboard. If there's bad weather or waves, you could then get water on deck. There could then be progressive down flooding or cross flooding or even up flooding from a damage at the bottom. The number 2, as well as what Tim mentioned of doing our 2D section for the strength. Quite often when the number 3 is busy modelling the intact, the number 2 will be looking at the plans and on the damage control plan and trying to assess if there's any potential up flooding or areas where that we need to be worried about. We quite often model a worst case scenario to see that if it does escalate, what happens. It's quite handy to know, say your client's trying to keep a certain tank dry through it pumping. If those pumps failed, would it still be okay? You don't want it all to rely on the stability of your vessel and just one pump able to keep that tank dry. Other than that, you can go down to just, if you can help it, try and not have an excessive trim, draft or heel. So things to consider, is your ship exceeding its scantling draft? If it needs to get towed out, is the trim too excessive to be able to have a tow? These are all kind of things that we want to be able to consider. And if the heel angle is allowing machinery and crew to operate. So that's us for floatability. Next is the oil outflow. This is perhaps one that has the biggest consequence on things outside of the ship. So main priority is to find how much will be lost and if we can minimize any further oil outflow. So for that, we need to have some basic parameters of the location of the breach, and the vertical extents for the breach are actually quite important to know. So if the hole for the breach is above the waterline, it's pretty simple. The oil will just flow out until it reaches the bottom of the hole, and the rest of it will mostly stay in the bottom of the tank. But it gets a little bit more complicated if the hole is just below the waterline. So here we have the grey is the flood water, and the grey is the oil, blue is flood water, and then these little red dots is us having to find a rough rectangular breach and where we think the damage is. So the hydrostatic pressure kind of comes into play here. So actually, the greater the hydrostatic pressure, the less cargo that you will lose. So here, because the oil floats on the top of the water, it's like the hydrostatic pressure is keeping it up in the top of the tank above where that damage is. And this is quite important. It comes into play for any further conditions. So for example, if you're aground and the tide drops, you're going to lose the hydrostatic pressure force on that hole and actually lose more cargo. Or some people, if you're on a ship and you've got a hole, you might first think, oh, I want to try get this hole above the waterline. So you start to heel the ship to bring the hole above the waterline. But as you're moving it further up, you're actually decreasing the hydrostatic pressure on that hole, and you'll actually have more oil outflow. So the better thing might be to actually heel towards the damage to almost help the hydrostatic pressure of the water almost like plug the rest of that oil in there, which is against what a lot of people end up, like their first instinct is to do. We also within the last year, have been able to add in a drift assessment of the oil path if the client wants to maybe see where the oil might end up. But yeah, now we're on to the last letter of our SS FOB, the G for the grounding. This is perhaps our most time-consuming one to do. The effects of grounding can impact your strength and stability quite seriously, and are quite often accompanied with a breach depending on the type of seabed. If it's like a rocky seabed and you run aground into it, you might have a hole in the bottom of your ship as well. So sometimes they're as simple as just waiting for the tide to come in, but oftentimes they take a little bit more work to do. So the first thing we need to do is establish how hard the ship is aground, and that is our grounding force. So it's a reaction force basically pushing the bottom of the ship up. So to be able to do this, we need to know what the ship's current floating drafts are at. And then what our software does is it then compares that with what the ship's floating position would be if it had that loading condition but wasn't aground. And then so the difference between those two, it then figures out how much of a force and where that force needs to be to force the ship to be aground. And if everything is all been modelled correctly, we've got the correct amount of flood water in there, etc. The ship's reported as their correct drafts. The force should appear where the ship is reporting it to. So once you've done that and we've determined how hard it's ground, where it's ground, it's very important to know what the soundings are around the vessel. So how deep the water is around the length of the vessel. Because when you're going to do the remedial stage, in this example that we have here, you can see that underneath the aft of the vessel, there's still quite a bit of water there. So as well as maybe perhaps lightering the vessel and rising it up, you could also trim it aft in this case. However, if the bottom of the bed that you'd ran aground on was a bit more level, if you trim it hard aft, you might end just running aground aft. And wouldn't want to do that. So the soundings are quite important. If it's a flat sea bed, you perhaps need to discharge more ballast water or cargo to be able to rise it up a little bit higher. The type of the seabed that you run aground onto also makes a bit of difference in these calculations. So if it's a rock, you're more likely to be aground at just a single point. For example, if it's like a rocky pinnacle. If it's a sandy bank and your ship's coming with a bit of speed, it might have taken a while for it to slow down. So the ship is actually supported by the sandy seabed over a greater length. So the distribution length of the grounding impacts the strength assessment a little bit, or a lot of it actually. The worst case for it is if it's just a single point grounding. So sometimes we'll end up modelling it as a single point, even if it's distributed over a short area, just because that will give us the absolute worst case. And if we're fine with the worst case, then we'll be fine with the better case. So the type of bottom also plays into effect of if you've ran aground on mud, there's an extra thing to play. The mud almost acts like a suction. If you've ever walked on some mud before and you've lifted your foot up, then it takes a little bit of effort to lift up. That's basically what's happening with the ship. So as well as having to lighten it to get rid of the grounding reaction force, you also have to do a little bit more to overcome the suction effect of the mud keeping it down. Sometimes the clients do that with tugs as well, or sometimes they just ballast it out even more. So occasionally I'll put your ballasting down and pulling ship free. Sometimes at high tide, you actually don't want the ship to float off. Like your clients might not have been able to get tugs out in time to deal with it if the reason it ran aground was that they had propulsion issues or steering issues, for example. Or it might be that you have just a very slight grounding reaction force, so your ship will move. And if it moves around, it can actually create further damage onto the underside. So sometimes for a high tide, you would ballast it down heavier to make sure it stays aground, so that then it will only float free when you're ready for it to float free. So that is the end of our SS Fog, and now we're going to go for a slightly more exciting part of a recent example that we had this year. So this is a case where we pretty much had everything in our SS Fog to think about, all apart from the oil outflow, thank goodness. But basically this vessel had ran aground and they had confirmed flooding and multiple water ballast tanks, but by the time they phoned us, they weren't aground anymore. But they had the issue of all the flooding. So the first thing that happens is we have the initial response, we're reactivated, we're called. We've not heard anything about this before. And we get a lot of our first information over the phone. So the client had told us that they had hit a rocky bottom and they damaged water ballast tanks all the way from the forepeak to aft of the midships on one side of the water ballast. They're very low in the water, they've told us, but thankfully the weather conditions are okay. So the first thing we do is we open up our model. The client sends us their loading condition just before the casualty. This is usually easier for the client to send us first instead of the whole casualty report form in one go, because they know what their condition was before the casualty, and it means that we can load it up in our model and get ready while they're still collating the damage information that we require. So after we do that, it's then on to establishing what the damage is. So we model the intact condition, the client agreed, it matched their condition, we know that we're good to go. So we model the damage, and basically on our software we can say that these tanks are flooded in open sea and it will fill it to the equilibrium with the water level. So we've done that, and then we check that the drafts that our model gives matches what the ship is actually floating at. Quite often we do this stage and we're like, oh, we're not matching with what the client says up to us. And it can actually mean that the client has either had more flooding that they haven't realised they've got, so that they would be lower in the water than us, or that the flooding hasn't actually equalised yet, it's still coming in. But in this case, the damage was so great that by the time the phone does, it was totally equalised in all the tanks and just floating in the equilibrium. So on this, the red line denotes the water line at the top, and you can see that it is pretty low at the bow. But this is also a section shown from the centre line. So when you factor in the fact it's heel to starboard, it's actually even worse than that looks. So if you remind yourself in the next slide, that is how low in the water it was floating. So if you look on that deck there, I would be thinking we have some floatability concerns. If there's any more water, it could start to down flood and get into the cargo holds, and that would be a pretty serious escalation. So as the damage hadn't been fully assessed yet, like when it first happened, there was a lot of uncertainties. The client was unsure if there would be any escalations like the further down flooding. So they asked us if they had to, would they be able to ground on a sandy beach nearby to prevent it sinking? So sometimes you actually want a deliberate grounding because a grounded ship is better than a sunk ship. So they informed us, and we basically assessed a soft grounding and a hard grounding on the bow, roughly just to see how she would sit. It turned out that it was an option, but it never needed to be used because the weather forecast was okay. And we were actually able to reduce the trim of the vessel, so to lift the bow out of the water by just trimming some water ballast from the non-damaged tanks to the aft peak tank, and that was enough to just make it a little bit more secure to just float free. So next in our SS fob was an S for the strength. So whilst the number 3 is loading up software and adding it all in, the number 2 has to very quickly make a brand new section of rules calc for a frame in the region of damage. But often we don't know the full extent of what the damage is immediately, because you've just run aground, you can't see under the water to see what the damage is. So we had to just make an assumption on what it is. So everything in the red box there is what we've deemed to take out of the section. So how we came about that was, we noticed the water ballast tanks on the starboard side. So we took from the starboard side water ballast tanks and just took everything on the bottom out. And we knew that it hadn't gone into the cargo tanks because they hadn't reported that. So we've left the bottom of the cargo tank section free. And so we then use this, as we talked before, to reduce the permissible envelope of the shear force and bending moment. So this next slide is what the original permissible limits were. So the left-hand side is the aft of the ship, the right-hand side is the forward of the ship. And you have the minimum and maximum you can do. And then we had calculated the percentage loss of strength here. And for the shear force, there was actually only about a 2% reduction. So it doesn't really show up in the graph. But where we got the most from our assessment was the bending moment. So the lighter lilac colour, and you can see that really has decreased quite a bit from there. But one thing I want to draw your attention to is the fact that we have reduced it over pretty much most of the length of the vessel. And in particular, you can see the dark purple top of the upper limit is totally level, so it's the same value all the way. But the bottom, middle and right points are at the same distance, but the one on the left is actually slightly higher, so it hasn't been reduced as much. And this is because we put the greatest section in the way of the damage, and then we actually just taper the reduction percentage off as we get further away from the damage. This is a little bit more conservative, and it means that we're not saying you've got this percentage reduction in this frame, and then immediately this frame you're up to 100%, you're totally intact, because you don't know what it will be. So we generally have the frame of the damage at the full amount that we've assessed it to be lost and taper it off. So that's why it's a little bit higher at the back corner. So that was our first assessment, and it ended up in our calculations meeting the strength criteria. But then 2 weeks later, we got a call back. So the client had time to get divers out. They had filmed the damage on the underside, and they'd made a diver's report on where the damage was. And it was actually quite a little bit more extensive damage than we'd first assumed. So we had to edit our permissibles. So it had actually been the greatest damage was at the front, and that was a lot worse than what we had first assessed. But as it had gotten further aft, the damage had gotten less, which is kind of what you expect. If you ran aground at hard speed, the front of your ship might have more of the damage than the aft by the time you slow down a little bit. So as a reminder, this is what we'd first done. And then we can see in these dotted lines, this is what our new principles were. So the light green is our shear, so this one we could actually notice the shear reduction. But if you notice with the new damage bending, it's actually a lot more reduced than what we'd first assumed, but we gained a little bit more bending moment capacity than we'd first assumed at the aft end. So another wee click there, just to highlight the difference from what they were designed and approved to operate in and what they currently had. So we had to make sure in our remedials that we had to work really quite hard to try and keep it within these limits. So whilst they'd also done that and had the divers out, they'd also done something quite clever, and they'd split their water ballast tanks. So their water ballast tanks they didn't have upper and lower to begin with, they were all connected as one tank. But what they've done is they had welded those connections shut and put in a valve. This meant that if there was any further flooding, it was only localized to the lower tanks and it wouldn't up flood into the upper water ballast tanks. And they were also able to do something quite clever of pressurize those valves to try and force some of the water out of the lower water ballast tanks, so they had slightly less water level than being totally full. They had also phoned us that they want to try and potentially repair some of their damaged tanks so they could then pump out the flood water and carry on sailing. But before they do that, they needed us to assess every single combination of what their post-repair conditions would be. So we ended up doing many combinations of the tanks to be repaired because they weren't actually sure which ones they could repair, and if they pumped them out, if they would be totally leak-free until after they'd happened. So as a quick reminder, we had 4 big tanks, water ballast tank, pipe tunnel that had gotten added in after that. They'd realised they got extra flooding there, so we had to update our model. And the water ballast starboard tanks 2, 3 and 4. So they had quite a lot. And after the repairs, they were able to have just these 2 dark blue tanks here, the water ballast tanks 2 and 3 starboard flooded. This made our remedials so much easier because we didn't need to worry as much about the scanting draft being exceeded or the freeboard being as close to the waterline anymore. So, and up until this point, the vessel had stayed in the same position at anchor. And now that they've done the repairs, the client was looking to get some of their cargo discharged and then be able to go on a repair voyage. So we've done that. We made sure that they're not going to sink. We need to think about the next thing of helping them with the discharge sequence because they do still have some flooding. So we get the constraints and the abilities from the clients and what they want to achieve for the discharge sequence, and here they just wanted all the cargo offloaded. So we worked with some salvers here to get some remedials, and we checked each stage, focusing on the strength and the stability. And we actually ended up getting called multiple different days here to make changes because there was things like actually their repair to the pipe duct started leaking, so we had to then consider that being open to the sea. And the amount of cranes they had available kept on changing, which changes how many cargo tanks you can offload in one step. So at this point, it can get quite hard to sometimes keep track of what conditions the ship is actually in and what is like a hypothetical future condition. So we had many different conditions we'd assessed at this stage. But they were able to get the cargo offloaded. And after that, we have the repair voyage. It's the final one. They've called to us. They just need to basically get these paper that say that we have, here's our calculations of them doing this voyage to just 2 tanks flooding, but no cargo. So we just, same go through our SS fog, we just check the strength is good, the stability is good, and with the floatability, it's got suitable heel and drafts. And after all the complicated stuff, this is a relatively easy condition to assess, and it's quite nice at the end of them to be able to help them with the repair voyage and then hopefully not see them again. But this took about 3.5 months from the first call to doing this last call with the client. So getting quite a few calls throughout their course of the repairs. So yeah, that was this one example. It was probably one of our more intense ones, I would say.
Yeah, definitely was. And whenever we looked at that graph at the beginning, which talked about the number of emergencies, this counted as 1. And it was a significant period of time with great contribution from a lot of people within LR. So, right, we have an opportunity for some questions to begin. I think, Lizzie, you're going to check the Zoom and let us know if you have any.
At the at the moment. We don't. Apparently, the sound wasn't great, unfortunately,
No apologies.
online. Which is not a lot we could do about that. But if there any questions in the room?
Yeah, hi, would you be able to give an estimate of the costs?
I'll repeat the question for those on Zoom, especially as the mic isn't working. Question was, can we give an estimate of the costs of repairing? The easy answer is no. I can't give a cost. Obviously, shipyards vary around the world. We don't get involved necessarily with advice on what the repair would be. That would be a matter of class if you're wanting to bring it back to classification. Our cost is pretty minimal in the cost of an emergency. We charge very minimal rates, I feel. Our ongoing cost per year, per vessel is in the region of £700, give or take. So it's roughly £2 a day to have a team of experts on hand to respond whenever you want. Obviously, we then do charge call-out fees, but again, as a proportion of the cargo value and also operational cost, we're a very low one. And the advice and the independence that we're able to give is appreciated by class and also by the owners or the charterers of the vessel. Thank you. Do you have any other questions? Oh, two at once, please.
Well, if I was correctly, you specialize mostly in damages, but have you also been into cases where there was a total loss of the ship?
Yeah.
Thankfully not since I've been responding, but I know that there's been people that have had a call out and it has turned into a total loss. But a lot of the times if the ship is a total loss immediately, there's no need to phone us because it's already, you know.
Yeah.
You haven't been into cases where you started the salvage and then it went wrong, that it was a total loss?
You'd probably better to answer this one, Lizzie, because you've been around a bit longer than me.
No, I don't think we've had that. I mean, we've had it where the ship's been scrapped afterwards.
It was like just enough to get it to.
Yeah, the damage was so great that the ship got scrapped. But if it's
Yeah.
well, no, because you get the scrappage value. So total loss is it's sunk and you don't recover it and you don't get any money back. You just have your insurance. But if it's the scraps, then you get the insurance and the scrappage.
And we have had one of those in recent time where it was declared a total loss, and people, the owner might declare it a total loss, and it's a little bit like your car. Someone might take it around the corner and do a backyard job on the cheap to maybe put it back into service, and that has happened. So yeah.
There was a famous one years ago where ships were so expensive to buy new that it actually made financial sense for them to cut the damaged midship region out, weld it back together, sail around for like a year while they were building a new midship section, bring it back to dry dock, cut it in half again, insert the new midship section, weld it all back up together. Yeah.
Please.
Does everybody provide advice when we get instances where the master is like to you?
That's a very good question. So for those on Zoom, the question was, do we ever have people not following our advice? And I think for those of you that will go to see the master, it's his ship. We do not tell you what to do. We provide advice, we provide support, say if you do this, this will happen, or this could happen. We don't tell you you have to do this. The last responsibility does lie with the master, and we will try and provide you with as much support as possible so that you can make the best decision as possible. I don't envy the masters. I'm sitting generally at home whenever we're responding during the night. It's a much more comfortable position to be in, to be on land. I do not envy them at all.
But a lot of the time it's not us that can say they can do it, but they still might need to get approval of that voyage from class because it's outside of their normal working, because they've got, say, a big hole in the side of their ship and they've got a tank, but quite often class will want to have an independent assessment of that condition and not just rely on the ship's one. So
the thing that's blown my mind most from your presentation was when you said about horses of oil and having the water filling the hole to get the oil above the line of the whole, that just.
Which is totally different from what some,
But it's
yeah.
nothing that I've ever been taught before, and that just blew my mind.
Yeah, that
It's
is,
just common sense, but it's not what you think when you're
yeah,
on a tank.
Yeah. Oh, I've got a hole in the port side and I've got outflow. Let me just heal my ship.
Yeah.
Moored port goes
Yeah.
against a lot of what you
Yeah.
would first think, but that's again why the ships quite often would phone us to help them come to that conclusion and help them to figure out if they're grounded at low tide, how to absolutely minimize the amount of oil outflows lost and give them a quantifiable number on it as well. So
Makes you wonder if the PD Spirit would have been a different result if they'd
gone the other way.
gone the other way. So for those, the cadets that haven't been in on, PD Spirit was a BLCC single hull. BLCC in 2012 got hit by a barge whilst they were at Anglia, and it was an environmental disaster. But maybe if that had gone, they'd listed the ship the other way. Might have been a different outcome.
So we have a couple of questions online. So the first question is, if you get an inquiry from a client who owns a ship not classed by LR, how are you able to access the vessel's documents such as the GA, the stability book?
Oh, that's a pretty simple one, is it? To enroll with us, we require them to supply us with the plans, and we have a set minimum amount of plans that they need to enroll with us. So we'll need some hull data in form of like a lines plan if it's a lead ship. And we absolutely do need the capacity plan and the GA, even if it's a sister vessel, because there might be some changes. But even if they're not classed by LR, they will supply it to us if they want to be enrolled with our service. And we have about a third of our ships aren't LR, so they're clearly happy to do that in this case.
and I think the thing is to note is that there is a minimum requirement to create a model. We need to know what you've got on board and the shape basically of your ship to be able to provide an accurate response. So that's a good question, thank you.
So the next question online is, have you done any military work? What are the additional challenges?
I think I could talk about having come from the Ministry of Defence. I actually was on the other side of an exercise. I was a client sending information to SIRS and to the office here. It is of challenge. We tend to only deal with the less sensitive vessels. The UK Ministry of Defence tends to hold on to the more warfighting vessels and do that in-house, but we are able to provide support where we do have the expertise. The challenges obviously around security. I have dual nationality and some countries don't like that. It's a bit of a problem when it comes to security stuff, but we do just work on it as a case-by-case basis. We have a team that are able to respond who are security checked. They aren't on call permanently, but they are, as part of their agreement, is because they are security checked, they will get called if we do have one of our military ships have an incident. They tend not to happen as often in the UK Navy at least. Obviously, the Americans have had a few more incidents in recent years. The Norwegians was a big one recently that everyone will have seen. In that case, the time between them colliding with the oil vessel and them running aground and virtually sinking was pretty quick. I don't think we would have been able to give them any advice in that time period because of the amount of damage that they had achieved during that incident.
By the time they've notified everyone else they need to notify and deal with on the ship, sometimes phoning us up and giving us all the information we need and sending us emails is a little bit lower down on the priority list.
And if we use an example that we didn't deal with, but HMS Endurance was a Royal Navy vessel that had a significant engine room flooding. And if they had come to us, or if they'd gone to their shore-based stability team, they would have been told to abandon the vessel. They were off the coast of Argentina. This is all public information, by the way. And it is, they saved it because the Navy train significantly with damage response. They will go into compartments that are flooding to plug those leaks. They have a lot more equipment on board than the commercial people. And I think they're also expected to put their lives in danger a bit more because that is their job. And it is a bit more crazy, I think. I don't envy them again. So, yeah. Thank you for the question on Zoom.
We have another one.
Ooh.
Yes. can you explain more about what SeaSafe does? How long does it take to model a ship from scratch?
Around 40 hours. So our day-to-day work job when we're not responding is to make these models. But we can actually respond to some ships that either the model hasn't been made yet or they weren't enrolled with us, and then after they've had a bit of a incident, they decided they want to call us. So we had one recently where they'd been aground for a while and they'd actually asked some salvors to come up with some plans, and they basically were not happy with the salvors' work. It looked like the salvors were having trouble making a model. So they asked us, and within 24 hours, we've been able to get them a full model from having nothing before, because 40 hours work is for one person. So we have an on-call team. So we just phone everyone up and we all work on modeling different parts of the ship together, and then all bring it into the one model. So within 24 hours, we were then able to actually start working on getting them some remedials from their grounding. So yeah, that was in, I think, like February.
And then the
March.
SeaSafe software itself?
And the SeaSafe software itself, yeah.
Yeah, SeaSafe is LR bespoke software that we own. We are the users of it. It's especially we maintain it in SERS, and we own it and we keep it for our benefit. And the great advantage of that is we have the coder sits a couple of desks away from us, a couple of days a week, and so we are able to make requests and say, hey,
This would be a cool feature.
This would be a cool feature. Or we had, with the pressurized tanks, we had to kind of work that ourselves, but be able to suggest, oh, is there a way in which we can incorporate that into SeaSafe? And having that very direct line. I have a meeting with him once a week. It's great to be able to sit alongside him and give suggestions, and for him just to do it. It's quite useful. It's a very unusual position to be in, to have that software support so close.
And it's a very user-friendly software. Like a lot of the black ones, it's hidden behind lines of code. You need to remember command lines to type in. It's just all visible there on the screen.
I mean, it's important to remember that it's quite similar to a loading instrument with extra bits to do things like grounding and oil outflow and things like that. But all the features you might expect from a loading instrument, it can pretty much do. Container loading, for example. SeaSafe can handle container loading.
Which is very important if the container ship ever needs a remedial action to be able to offload the containers as you need.
Do we have any more questions in the room? Please, gentleman at the back.
What do you think about the, thanks very much for the talk, that was very interesting. What do you think about the level of training and knowledge of the ship's crew about damage?
It is varied. I don't want to, obviously you guys are, some of you are at the beginning of your careers. It does vary. You have so much to learn. You have a lot going on. Hopefully you've remembered that oil outflow piece that struck the lady over there as being a really interesting piece that actually you want to heal towards that damage. It is varied. I think crews have a lot to do in their day job, and you hope and pray that doesn't happen, that you have an incident.
But that's why we have the exercises, and we've definitely noticed a difference between a crew that is completing their first ever exercise with us and just recently enrolled, and a crew that maybe does an exercise every year. So as Tim had mentioned, that we have about 50% of our exercises are passenger ships, but only 5% of our enrollments. The passenger ships really seem to know what's going on now. They're like, oh yeah, you require this information, and they'll sometimes send it over to us ahead of the exercise, whereas some new clients, they don't really understand what information we need and not. So that's why we offer the exercises. So it's as much as helping us keep our skills up to date and train, and helping the clients understand what they need.
Yeah, and we do also offer bespoke training as well. So if you in future are on board a yacht or on board any vessels or in charge of anything, we can offer specific training on how to use this.
We do run damage control courses here at Warside, but I agree that the Navy, obviously, because of the weaponry and all the rest of it, they want to keep the ship. Since the adoption of the safe return to port with cruise ships, that's made a bigger difference in the fact that they need to do more to, obviously the ship is your best lifeboat. But because there's been so many incidents over the years where the crew have abandoned ship because that's what they're trained to do, but then the ship stays afloat and everybody dies in the life raft or the lifeboat. which I know sounds terrible. So there are courses, but it's not a mandatory course to do command, to do a command and control course. It's very much up to the owner of the company whether they want the crew to do a command and control course. Whereas other courses that we do, like a basic safety training week, your advanced firefighting, your advanced first aid, life saving, all that sort of thing, then that's mandatory. But it is a bit hit and miss as to whether companies will provide you with damage control training, because most of the instinct is you just get off the ship and into the lifeboat.
Please, thank you for your comment. I do agree.
Narrowing the pre-ultimate questions to my colleague down the front there, regarding ships, captains choosing to go with you or not. What would be some of the adverse reasons why they choose not to go?
Oh, so that's
That's a good question. For those on Zoom, I'll use this time to repeat the question whilst we think. The question was, what would be some adverse reasons not to go with us and not to use us? Is that correct, sir?
they could go with a competitor or some of the ships in the plan chasing stage of how we said we have a certain amount of plans that we need to enroll the vessel. So a basic one is we need the hull data. We need a lines plan, because otherwise how can we respond? And then quite often they get stuck in that stage that the client is like, well, I don't want to give you my lines plan. And then we're like, well, we can't model your vessel then. It's pretty much where it mostly ends up getting stopped at.
I think one thing I would notice is there are some vessel types that it is a legislative requirement that you have a shore-based stability support, and that is regularly tested. And for the vessels that don't pick us and don't use that and just kind of pray and hope that they're not going to have an incident, they're welcome to do that.
They rely on their own in-house knowledge, but the issue is how often would they have an incident in their company to put that knowledge to the test? Because for the individual manager, it might be very few, but for us, we basically get, as Tim said, one or so every few weeks or so. So personally, we're biased. There's more advantages in being with us than disadvantages.
And I think if we go back to the owner's cost, it's such a minimal cost that we charge on a yearly basis. Even the enrollment fee isn't that much. And generally, if you have an incident, your insurance will cover our call-out fee. So from a client perspective, I don't know why they're not with us. I think when I was back at the MOD with the vessels that we didn't have with Lloyd's, with SIRS, we did in-house, there was a little bit of worry of skills fade because we had a day job to do as naval architects. We weren't able to practice our damage response modeling. Maybe once a year we would get together, whereas we're doing 3 exercises a week. It is a very different kettle of fish. We have quite a large number in our fleet. I haven't put that information up for commercial reasons, but that number means that we are busy and we're able to have that experience to be able to give the advice that you need when you need it.
Just about something here, the mentality of the office is the same with the sales group. They think it's very unlikely something will happen. All right, and the first thing in their mind is to save the crop out of the ship, and then we go to the finance and plus for the money. So they don't train for it. Okay, I've been in the for almost 30 years. Again, all the time it was the same scenario. When we had a message response because it's compulsory. 4 tankers and 4 bulk guys going to the United States. So it is compulsory for the majority of the ships. But still, people from the office didn't want to participate. PR, they will be exposed for that knowledge. Okay. Secondly, they said it never happened. That's the main idea. The money, yes, it's not.
Yeah.
Compared to other costs.
We get many ships that
It is an interesting one, the human side of emergency response. We do lots of things that are dangerous in our day-to-day lives that we don't necessarily think are that likely to happen. Like we hear about car crashes, but it never happens to me. And I think we hear about ships crashing a little bit less than they actually do. The Suez Canal grounding that everyone in the entire world heard about, there was 4 Suez Canal groundings since then that you haven't heard about, that we dealt with. And so I think that's where giving people the knowledge of how often it does happen is useful, but it's also it's trying to prepare for the unlikely, and it is a hard sell. Risk management is not everyone's favorite cup of tea, but I think having option to be prepared and to have someone you can call upon. And even if your vessel isn't enrolled and you're in the shore-based team in future and you have a ship that goes aground, you'll know that there is a service that exists that you can call us up, and within roughly 24 hours, we'll be able to have advice for you.
There's many ships that they've enrolled with us, 15, 20 years ago, and they haven't done a single exercise, but we still have that model on a shelf somewhere, basically, so that if it does happen, they can call us up. Of course, we'd suggest that you have exercise so that your team knows how best to aid us. But even without that, we'll be able to work it through. So there's loads that they've just played their annual subs.
If they remember that they can't service.
If they remember, that's
That is true.
There's such a minimal amount on their budget each year that comes out, you know.
So we had a point of information on the thing about the MOD.
Yep.
They said in the MOD, they also have Salmo, who, while the project might do once a year, they do an exercise far more regularly as they exercise with each project.
I did work with Salmo. They're a great organization. They are very well prepared. Yeah, I agree.
And we have another question. Is there a digital model of all LR class ships? If a digital model is available, does this substantially improve the speed of response to the emergency?
A digital model would substantially improve our response if you're not enrolled with us. There is not a digital model for every LR class ship. I think in future we would like that to be part of the process of enrolling with class. You get your new build, all the plans are supplied to LR class, and as part of that they come onto us and we're able to generate that model and make it. I think we
do have to be quite clear though. There's a fundamental difference between the different types of digital model that class uses.
Yeah.
Because what we're talking about is a stability model. But there'll also be FE models. And when they talk about digital twins, for example, that's not suitable for stability calculations. So a lot of clients there is a stability model because LR built one in order to do the stability approvals for the stability book. And those often form the basis of a SIRS enrollment.
Right, because quite often we can maybe get the hull form from them, but there's different tolerances that we work to and different type of things that we want in our model. So like in their model, they'll have, say, where all the sounding points are and everything, whereas we're focusing on like the openings and the margin line. And so quite often we'll just make it so that we know it is exactly just what we need and nothing extra to make that model big. Just what we need to do our response.
Yeah. There's currently no more questions online. Are there any more in the room? We've got 3 minutes left.
3 minutes. Anyone want to take a final stab? Please.
Hi, I'm guessing like LR's service, this DMV is also having there are competition in the market. Like, what do you do differently from them to get new clients like this?
I think that's a good question. DMV, we were the first, I think, as the first off point. DMV, they offer, their branding is DMV ERS, ABS, yes, offer a service.
All the classes.
All the class societies generally offer a service.
Quite often our enrollment fee, if they're, say, a new construction that is going with LR class, it will get included in like a big block fee for lots of LR services, and SIRS will be bundled into that. So why would they want to choose a different class society if we're kind of included in their big block fee when they first are under new construction?
But the same holds true for the ships.
For the other
with other class societies, they often get their response service bundled in with their class fees too.
So we have roughly a third of our vessels aren't with Lloyd's and aren't classed with Lloyd's, and I think it's those clients come to us because of our history and our knowledge, the fact that we have CSAFE as our own software that we're able to use. We can improve with actively seeking out improvements, taking feedback from the emergency response team and passing that on to our developers. And I think that's one thing that does set us apart. We have just launched drift prediction. a service that we came up with using some open source algorithms that came out of the university over in Norway. And that is a tool that is actually not every class society offers that. DMV does offer it, but we are also able to offer it, and we are trying to differentiate ourselves in that way. And I think ship owners, they like class and they don't like changing as often, and being able to offer a good service. So one of our clients that recently had an incident, because of the incident that they had, they only had 20 ships enrolled with us. They've then added another 60 because of the support that we gave them in that incident. So by delivering a good service whenever people have issues, I think that is also a way of driving business. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I think we will call that to an end. I'd just like to thank Sophie and Tim for an excellent presentation. So if we could all give them a nice big round of applause.
Thank you for organising it, Lizzie.
Thanks for attending. We this is a little bit embarrassing. Our next lecture is on the 21st of November, but it was originally our December lecture. We've had to swap it about, and I can't actually remember the title. But it's been given by one of the lecturers here at Solent. That helps. It's Giles. Yeah.
Doing something about super yacht design.
I think it is to do, it is a yachty one, but he hasn't provided the lecture title yet.
Look at the Southern Joint Branch, people that, and then you can see what the upcoming.
We will be having an email sent out once Giles gives me the information I need by HQ to anyone who's actually a an IRS member.
And the other thing to remember is our Southern Joint Branch annual dinner, if you want to come along to the Southern Joint Branch annual dinner, which is at St Mary's Stadium on November the 10th.
Yes, the deadline for buying a ticket. Yeah,
You might have to save up a week's wages.
the deadline for registration is the 28th of October. You can find details on our website, www.southernjointbranch.co.uk. And then you can find information about the annual dinner and a link to where you can buy tickets. There is a discount for students. Well, actually a discount for the 25. So even if you're not a student, but you're youthful in appearance, we won't question it. And I think on that note, we will
be uploading the slides as a presentation.
Yes,
on
the
website for you to look at. Yeah.
well, we normally upload to YouTube, but it seems that there may be some sound issues, so I'm going to have to listen to the quality of the sounds to see whether we can upload the video to YouTube. It may be that I'll get these guys to re-record the sound, and then we can upload it to YouTube.
Thank you very much. Sophie and I will just be down here if you want to ask us any questions. We'll be around for the next like 10-ish minutes or so. Thank you.